she got off the bus. That is where this story begins. Not with a wedding, not with a divorce, not with a billionaire in a tailored suit standing across a glittering Lagos ballroom. It begins with a tired 22-year-old nursing student, 400 naira in her pocket, a warm Fanta she had been saving since noon, and a choice that every other person on that bus decided was not theirs to make. The harmattan was thick that Tuesday night in Enugu, the kind of dry, dusty air that coats your throat and makes the headlights of passing cars look like they're pushing through fog. Adaeze Okonkwo had been on her feet for 11 hours. Her uniform smelled like antiseptic and effort. Her feet were arguing with her shoes. She had one destination in mind, home, her bed, and that Fanta, and she was 7 minutes away from all three. Then the bus slowed. In the yellow wash of the headlights, she saw him, a man in the red dust beside an overturned motorcycle, foreign, alone, not moving the way people move when they are only resting. The bus driver looked. The passengers looked. Someone near the back muttered something about it not being their business. The driver's foot moved back to the accelerator. Adaeze stood up. "Stop this bus!" She did not shout it. She did not beg. She said it the way she would one day say "clear" in an emergency room, with the flat authority of someone who has already decided what happens next and is simply informing the room. The driver stopped. She got off. She crossed to where he lay and knelt in the red dust without hesitation, already scanning, already assessing, the way her training had rewired her instincts to respond before her fear could catch up. His left leg was badly gashed. He had lost too much blood. His breathing was shallow and uneven. He was unconscious, but only just. She pulled the scarf from around her neck, a blue cotton scarf her mother had given her, and used it as a tourniquet without ceremony. She screamed for help until a keke driver slowed down. She climbed in beside the stranger and directed the driver to the nearest hospital, holding the man's wrist the entire way, monitoring his pulse with 2 fingers like it was the only thing she had been put on earth to do. At the hospital, she spoke to the nurses at intake with the confidence of someone who belonged there. She gave them everything she had observed, blood pressure estimate, wound depth, time elapsed. She stayed in the corridor until someone from his hotel was reached, until she was certain the machine of care had started turning properly around him. Then she picked up her bag and turned to leave. She was halfway down the corridor when she heard him. His voice was weak, fractured, but it carried. "Wait." She turned. He was half propped on the gurney, one of the intake nurses trying to ease him back down. His eyes, dark, glassy with pain, but startlingly focused, had found her across the corridor with an intensity that stopped her feet. He tried to speak. The words came out slowly, assembled with great effort, in English that sounded like it had been packed in a suitcase and jostled on the journey over. You helped me. I don't know your name." "Adaeze," she said. "Adaeze." He repeated it carefully, like he was memorizing it. "Jae-won Seo. Jae-won Seo." He paused to breathe. "If we are meeting again, I will help you. Whatever you are needing. This is my word. I promise this." She looked at him for a moment, at this battered, bleeding stranger who was using what little strength he had left not to call for a painkiller, not to ask about his motorcycle, but to make her a promise. She smiled, the way kind people smile at things they don't expect to ever collect. "Rest," she said softly. "You don't owe me anything." And she walked out into the harmattan night. She ate her Fanta on the walk home. She never told anyone about that night. She filed it away in the part of herself that did good things quietly, without keeping score, and she moved forward. She never expected to see him again. And here is where you need to stay with this story, because what came next was not a fairy tale. It was not easy or smooth or golden. What came next was 10 years of a real woman's life, and you need to feel the weight of those years to understand what the ending actually means. If this kind of story is already pulling at something in you, tap the like button right now. And if you're new here, subscribe, because this channel tells the stories that stay with you long after the screen goes dark. Now come with me, because we are moving forward in time and things are about to get much more complicated. Adaeze graduated at the top of her class. She moved to Lagos at 24 with 2 bags, a folder of certificates, and the unshakable calm of someone who had decided somewhere between Enugu and the expressway that she was going to build something real with her own hands. She got a position at a well-regarded private clinic in Victoria Island and was, within 18 months, the nurse that every senior doctor requested by name. Not because she flattered them, because she never lost her head when everything was falling apart. And in medicine, that quality is worth more than any certificate in any folder. She kept a handwritten list of her patients' names taped to the inside of her locker. She brought her own pepper soup to night shifts and always made too much. She had a laugh that arrived slowly, like it had to clear customs first, but when it finally came, people several rooms away would turn their heads toward the sound without knowing why. She also had Ngozi. Ngozi was a Lagos pharmacist with the energy of someone who had been awake since before you were born and the loyalty of someone who would help you bury a body, no questions asked, as long as you explained on the drive over. She had been trying to get Adaeze to live a little since they shared a hostel room in year 2, and she had not stopped trying since. It was Ngozi who pointed out Emeka Briggs at the Industry Health Mixer in 2018. "The one in the blue agata," she said in the low voice she used when she had already made a decision about something. "He's been looking at you for 40 minutes. "He's probably looking at you," Adaeze said. "Ngozi, I know when someone is looking at me, and I know when someone is looking at you. These are 2 very different events. Go and talk to him." She didn't, but he came to her. Emeka Briggs was handsome in the way some Lagos men are handsome, deliberately, with effort, like appearance is a business strategy. He was light-skinned, well-tailored, and carried the kind of smile that had been deployed so many times it had become almost automatic. But in those first months, there was something genuine beneath it. He was funny when he wasn't trying to be impressive. He asked her real questions and actually waited for the answers. He pursued her for 8 months with the patience of a man who understood that she was not the kind of woman you rushed. They married in 2019. The ceremony filled 3 halls and briefly trended on Lagos Instagram. For a while, it was good. Then it wasn't. It didn't collapse all at once. That was the thing about it, the thing that made it so hard to name, so difficult to leave. It was a slow erosion, a daily, incremental wearing down of something that had once felt solid. It was the way he went quiet for 3 days when she got promoted and he didn't close a deal. The way he'd say, "You know how you look in photos," when she suggested they capture a trip together, and then look away before she could respond. The way his mother announced at Christmas dinner with the casual cruelty of a woman who thought she was simply stating facts, that her son deserved someone who photographed well. And the way Emeka, sitting right there, right beside her, said absolutely nothing. Adaeze absorbed it. She was good at absorbing things. She told herself this was love, that love required endurance, required patience, required staying when the easier thing was to go. Then his business started failing. Emeka's import company had never been as solid as he performed it to be. By year 3 of the marriage, the cracks were structural. Quietly, without making it a discussion she knew would wound his pride, Adaeze began covering the rent, then his business overhead, then his car note. She did it the way she did everything, without announcement, without scorekeeping, because she believed that is what you did for the person you had chosen. What she did not know was that she was funding the lifestyle he was using to outgrow her. She noticed Mireille's name on his phone in the spring of their 4th year, a text at 11 p.m. that he angled away from her. She did not ask about it that night. She asked herself instead the question that faithful people always ask too late: could I be imagining this? She was not imagining it. Mireille Kwan was 27, Lagos-born to a Korean father and a Yoruba mother, and she moved through the city's social world with the practiced ease of someone who had turned her background into a personal brand. She was beautiful and calculating in equal measure, not a villain exactly, but a person who had decided very early that life was a series of strategic positions, and she intended to occupy the best ones available. Her most powerful asset was a single detail she deployed like a VIP pass. Her uncle, Chairman Hyun-soo Kwan of Kwan Continental, a Korean-Nigerian conglomerate with deep roots in Lagos infrastructure, the fact that she had met this uncle exactly 2 times, once at a family funeral, once at a cousin's wedding where he left before the cake, was a fact that Mireille had decided was irrelevant to how the story should be told. In Lagos, proximity to money is its own currency, and Mireille had learned to spend it. Emeka did the math quickly, the way insecure and ambitious men always do. Mireille was a shortcut, a door, a seat at a table he had always believed he deserved, but had never been able to reach on his own merits. And Adaeze, steady, dark-skinned, self-made Adaeze, who had quietly funded his life for 2 years, had never been part of that calculation. The divorce papers arrived on a Tuesday. She was at the reception desk of the clinic between patients when the courier came. Yellow vest, clipboard, her full name printed on the envelope with an indifference that felt almost insulting. Mrs. Adaeze Briggs. She read it twice, folded it, put it in her bag, finished her shift, checked on every single one of her patients, drove home in silence, parked outside her building, and sat in the car for 20 minutes without moving. Then she went inside, sat down on the kitchen floor, not the sofa, the floor, because sometimes grief needs to be close to the ground, and cried in a way she had not cried since her father's funeral. Not the pretty kind of crying, the kind that empties you. She cried until there was nothing left. Then she got up, because that was who she was. That had always been who she was. Ngozi arrived within the hour. Nobody called her. Nobody had to. She came through the door with a bag containing 2 wraps of Eba, a bottle of Origin, a scented candle she forgot to bring a lighter for, and the energy of a woman who had been waiting years to properly dislike Emeka Briggs and had finally been given permission. She sat on the kitchen floor beside Adaeze without asking why they were on the floor. "I never liked him," she said. Adaeze looked at her. "You danced with him 4 times at our wedding." "I liked the music at your wedding. Those are 2 very different things." She unwrapped the Eba. "Eat, and then tell me everything." This is the moment, right here, where this story changes direction. If you're feeling Adaeze's pain right now, you are exactly the audience this story was made for. Drop the word river in the comments, just that one word, and I will know you're with me. Subscribe if you haven't already. Turn on notifications, because what is coming in the second half of this story, you will want to be here for it. Now, let's keep going. She applied for the senior nursing position 6 weeks after signing the divorce papers. She was not looking for a new beginning. She was not thinking about fate or poetry or the strange circular logic of the universe. She was thinking about her qualifications, the job description, and the salary range, which was significantly better than her current one. The posting was for a flagship medical facility being established under a new foreign investment project, Seo Continental Holdings, a Korean-Nigerian infrastructure group whose Lagos expansion had been all over the business papers. She did not read the business papers. She read the job description, wrote a clean cover letter, and submitted her application before she could second-guess herself. She got the interview, then she got the job. Ngozi found out and sent 9 voice notes in a row, each one louder than the last. The final one was just 30 seconds of what could only be described as a spiritual experience. The welcome reception for new senior staff was held on a Thursday evening, a rooftop venue in Victoria Island, the city spread out below like something that had been lit deliberately to impress. Adaeze almost didn't go. She had been on her feet since 7 that morning, and her idea of a Thursday evening involved her couch, her TV, and not speaking to anyone. Ngozi sent a single text: "If you don't go, I will come to your house and personally escort you in your pajamas. Your choice." She went. She wore a simple black dress and had her natural hair pinned up and carried herself the way she had been carrying herself since that kitchen floor, with the particular quiet dignity of a woman who has survived something and chosen not to make a performance of it. She was standing near the window, holding a glass of water she hadn't drunk for approximately 15 minutes, when she felt someone stop behind her. She turned, and the whole world did something strange. He was older. Of course he was. It had been 10 years. The boy she had knelt beside in the dust had grown into this, a man with the stillness of someone who had learned, at great cost, how to be the quietest person in any room. He was dressed simply for someone at the center of a $500 billion infrastructure announcement. He was looking at her the way people look at something they have been searching for long enough that finding it doesn't feel real. He said one word: Ngui. Adaeze went very still. "Ogui Road," he said quietly. 2014. You used your scarf." He touched his left forearm, where a pale, thin scar traced a line she recognized immediately. "I kept it on purpose, to remember." She stared at him for a long moment. Then, despite everything, despite the city and the crowd and the 10 years between them, she said, "That's a little dramatic." Something moved in his face. "I'm a very dramatic person," he said, without the faintest trace of a smile. "I just do it quietly." And Adaeze laughed, the real laugh, the one that arrived late, that cleared customs, that turned heads. She covered her mouth with her hand and laughed at the sheer improbability of this moment, in this room, on this ordinary Thursday evening. He smiled then, properly, like a man who had been waiting for a long time to see that exact thing. "I looked for you," he said, "for years. I only knew your first name." "I didn't tell anyone about that night," she said. "I know. That made it harder." A pause. "My name is Jae-won Seo, chairman of Seo Continental Holdings. You're on the invitation I nearly didn't RSVP to." "And you are Adaeze Okonkwo, senior nursing director, new appointment. You were described to me as the one who will reorganize the entire department in 60 days and make everyone feel it was their idea." "That's accurate," she said. They stood in silence for a moment. The city hummed below them. Somewhere behind them, someone was giving a speech about infrastructure and opportunity that neither of them was listening to. "Can I get you a drink? Since you've been holding that water without drinking it for approximately 15 minutes. She looked down at the glass in her hand, then back at him. "Yes," she said. "Actually, yes." What followed was not a love story that moved quickly. Neither of them was built for speed in matters that counted. What happened instead was something slower and more honest than that: the gradual, careful, mutual discovery of two people who had both learned, at great cost, not to rush toward anything they could afford to lose. He visited the hospital. She gave him a tour that was technically professional and emotionally transparent in the way that honest people cannot hide. The pride in her voice when she described the pediatric ward, the way she knew the name of every nurse she introduced him to, the way she paused at the recovery room and said quietly, "This is my favorite view. I like seeing people on their way out." He said nothing in response to that. He just looked at her profile for a moment longer than was strictly necessary. He asked questions that were technically about the facility and were genuinely about her. She answered them. Then she started asking her own. She learned about the list in his desk drawer, not the business contacts or the investment pipeline, a small handwritten list of personal debts, people who had done something for him that the usual mechanisms of the world had no way of repaying. He had been working through it, methodically, for years. Her name was on it, since 2014. "You kept a list," she said. They were in his office. She had a coffee she was actually drinking this time. Outside the window, Lagos was being loudly and aggressively itself. I did. For 10 years, it seemed important to be thorough. She was quiet for a moment. My name was on it? At the top. She set down her coffee, looked at him. Jae-won, you don't owe me anything. I've told you this. Yes, and I've told you that I disagree. These are both true simultaneously. That's not how things work. It's how I work. He said it without arrogance, just as a fact about himself delivered plainly. I was raised to believe that a debt acknowledged is a character test. You got off the bus when no one else did. That is not a small thing. I have never treated it as a small thing. She was quiet again. The city made noise outside. Somewhere in the building, someone dropped something metal and everyone within earshot heard about it. I was in a bad marriage, she said. She hadn't planned to say it. It arrived the way truth sometimes does, sideways while you're looking at something else. He did not offer sympathy in the reflexive way that people offer it to fill silence. He waited, let the weight of what she had said sit between them properly. What did he take? He asked, finally. She thought about it. My volume, she said. I got quieter in everything. I stopped wearing certain colors, stopped laughing as loudly, I stopped taking up space because taking up space seemed to bother him. Jae-won looked at her for a long time, at this woman sitting across from him, full of warmth and intelligence and a kind of bone-deep integrity that he had met in exactly no one else. He felt something that he had no clean professional category for. For the record, he said carefully, you take up exactly the right amount of space in every room I have ever seen you in. She looked at him. Something shifted in her expression, not dramatically, but in the way that a window shifts when someone opens it, just a fraction, just enough to let the air move differently. You're doing the dramatic thing again, she said. I told you, he said. It's a condition. Adaeze did not fall in love the way she had the first time. The first time, with Emeka, it had been sudden, a door swinging open fast, bright light pouring through before she could assess what was on the other side. She had walked through it because it felt like courage. She understood now that it had been hope wearing courage's clothes. This time was different. This time it was a slow accumulation. Like rainfall that doesn't announce itself, you simply look up one day and realize the ground is thoroughly, irreversibly wet. It was the Tuesday he showed up at the hospital with coffee from the place 3 streets away that she had mentioned exactly once in passing 2 weeks earlier. He handed it to her at the nurse's station without ceremony, said, "You mentioned you liked the ginger one," and walked away to his site meeting before she could construct a response. It was the evening he called her, not texted, called, to ask how a patient she had mentioned in passing was recovering, a patient he had never met, whose name he had remembered. It was the way he listened, not the performance of listening that people deploy in conversation, the nodding, the waiting for their turn. He actually listened. He retained things. He noticed when something she said contradicted something she had said a month earlier and asked about the difference. It made her feel, for the first time in a very long time, like she was genuinely visible. It was the Adaeze incident. He had decided, in the quiet, determined way he decided most things, that he was going to cook for her. Not takeout, not a restaurant reservation disguised as home cooking, actually cook. He had researched Nigerian cuisine with the same methodical focus he apparently brought to continental infrastructure deals, selected Adaeze soup as his opening statement, and invited her to dinner on a Saturday. She arrived to find him standing in the kitchen with the expression of a man who had just lost an argument with a pot. "How is it going?" she asked, setting down her bag. "I have made a decision," he said. "What decision?" "That Adaeze soup is more complex than its ingredients suggest." She walked to the stove, looked into the pot, looked back at him. "Jae-won, yes. What temperature did you use?" A pause. "The instructions I found said medium heat." "For how long?" A longer pause. She pressed her lips together very firmly. "Okay," she said. "Move." She took over the kitchen with the efficient authority she brought to emergency rooms. He stood beside her and watched, asking questions she answered without turning away from the stove, and somewhere in the middle of explaining the difference between how the melon seed should look before and after proper blending, she realized she was happy. Not performing happiness, not deciding to be positive, simply, cleanly, without complication, happy. She looked sideways at him. He was already watching her. "You're learning," she said. "I am," he agreed, and they both understood he was not talking about the soup. Ngozi's verdict of the evening delivered the next morning via voice note. "First of all, he called me after you left to ask if there was a cooking class in Lagos that specializes in Nigerian cuisine. Second of all, I gave him 3 options. Third of all, he enrolled in all 3. Adaeze, I need you to understand. I would have married Emeka's driver before I married Emeka. This man is something else entirely." The cooking classes became a recurring joke between them. He reported progress with the seriousness of a quarterly earnings update. She evaluated each new attempt with the composure of a medical professional and the private delight of a woman who found him extraordinary and was not yet ready to say so out loud. He was also learning her in other ways. He learned that she woke up before the city did and that the first 20 minutes of her morning were sacred. Tea, silence, her own thoughts, no phone. He learned not to schedule anything before 8 a.m. He learned that she processed difficult emotions through movement, long walks, usually alone, usually with music she never mentioned to anyone. He learned that she was funny in a dry, quiet way that only landed if you were paying attention, and that she reserved that humor for people she trusted, which meant the more she made him laugh, the more it meant. He learned that the divorce had done something to her confidence that she was still quietly rebuilding, that there were moments at events, in photographs, in rooms full of certain kinds of Lagos people, when she would pull slightly inward, make herself smaller, the way a person does when they have been trained to expect criticism from the space around them. And he learned that the most useful thing he could do in those moments was not grand gestures or reassurance, but simply to move closer, to stand beside her, to let the proximity say what the words couldn't. She noticed. She always noticed. 3 months into whatever this was, neither of them had named it yet, because naming things felt like pressure, and they were both people who had learned to distrust pressure. She arrived at his office one afternoon to drop off a report and found him on a call, speaking in rapid Korean, standing at his window with his jacket off and his sleeves rolled up. He turned when she entered, held up one finger, and pointed at the chair across from his desk. She sat. While he finished the call, she looked around his office, the clean lines, the Lagos skyline through the full-length windows, the single framed photo on his otherwise bare shelf, his parents, she assumed, in front of a building she didn't recognize. And on his desk, beside his laptop, a small, worn notebook left carelessly opened. She did not intend to read it, but it was open, and the first page visible was a simple list handwritten in a careful, deliberate hand. 7 names, 6 of them crossed through with a single clean line. The 7th, Adaeze Okonkwo, Enugu, 2014. Not crossed out. He finished the call, turned, saw her looking at the notebook. "I haven't crossed it out yet," he said. "I can see that. I haven't figured out what repayment looks like for that specific debt." She looked at him steadily. "I told you there is no debt. I know you believe that. I believe something different. I believe that what you did that night was the kind of thing that changed the direction of a life, mine specifically. And I believe that deserves, not repayment exactly, recognition. I want you to know that I know what you did, that I have never forgotten, that it mattered." She was quiet for a long time. Outside, Lagos was performing its usual enormous noise. My mother used to say that kindness is not a transaction, that you don't do it for return, you do it because it is the shape of who you are. Your mother is right, but she is describing your motivation. I am describing mine. A pause. I want to be the person who shows you what it looks like when someone pays attention to who you are, when someone does not ask you to make yourself smaller, when someone— He stopped, collected himself with the quiet discipline she had come to recognize in him. "I want to stand beside you, if you will let me." She looked at him for a long time. Jae-won? Yes. Is this you asking me something? I am working up to it, he said seriously. I am a very thorough person. She smiled. I've noticed. The question came 3 weeks later on a walk along Victoria Island waterfront after a dinner that had run 3 hours because neither of them wanted to leave. The city was warm and golden behind them, her shoes in her hand because the path was soft and she had decided heels were no longer relevant to the evening. She was laughing at a voice note Ngozi had sent, something about a customer at the pharmacy who tried to argue about the pharmacological properties of a drug he clearly had just Googled when Jae-won stopped. She turned. He had his hands in his pockets. He was looking at her with the open, unguarded expression she had come to recognize as his most honest one, the one that appeared when he had decided that precision mattered more than protection. He has said, I've been thinking. That's dangerous, she said. I want to stand beside you, not above you, not in front of you, beside you, for everything that comes next. Every room, every hard thing, every ordinary Tuesday. He paused. I have been practicing this. I can tell, she said softly. I know this is not technically a question. No, it's not. I've been working on it for 10 years. I didn't want to phrase it wrong. She was quiet for a moment. The water moved beside them. The city breathed. She looked at this man who had kept a scar on purpose and a list in a drawer and enrolled in 3 cooking classes and stood closer when rooms made her feel small and had crossed 6 names off a list over a decade and left 1 uncrossed because he was thorough, because he took things seriously, because that was simply who he was. She laughed, the real one, the one that arrived late and filled everything. Yes, she said. Obviously yes. He let out a breath that suggested he had, despite everything, not completely been certain. You were nervous, she said. I am a very dramatic person. I just do it quietly. She shook her head, took his hand. They walked back along the water while Lagos did its extravagant best around them, and she felt, for the first time in a longer than she could measure, exactly the right size. No more, no less. Meanwhile, across the city, in a Lekki apartment with a view that cost more than it was worth, Emeka Briggs was reading a business newspaper with the focused intensity of a man who has recently identified an opportunity and intends to capitalize on it. The headline, Seo Continental Holdings announces 500 billion naira Lagos infrastructure partnership. He read it twice, then he looked up at Mireille, who was at the kitchen counter, arranging flowers she had bought to impress no one in particular. Your uncle, the chairman, Kwan Continental, they're involved in this Seo deal. Mireille did not look up. Subcontractor arrangement, infrastructure sourcing. So your uncle knows this Seo personally. They've met. Emeka set the paper down. He was calculating. She could always tell when he was calculating. His eyes went slightly distant, the way they did when he was working out how to position something. The gala, he said, the Seo Continental Infrastructure Gala next month, the black tie one. Can you get us in? Mireille considered this for longer than she let on. She trimmed a stem. I can make a call. Make the call, he said. He picked up his coffee. This is our moment, Mireille. I've been waiting for a room like this. We get in front of Chairman Seo. I make the right impression. This is the connection that changes everything. Mireille said nothing. She arranged her flowers. She thought about the fact that she had met her uncle twice in her life and was about to ask him for a favor on behalf of a man whose ambition had always been larger than his patience. But she made the call. The invitation arrived on a cream envelope with gold trim. Emeka held it like a man holding a winning lottery ticket, carefully with both hands, like the paper itself might sense his desperation and change its mind. He read it 3 times. Seo Continental Holdings cordially invites. He set it on the kitchen counter, picked it up again, set it back down. We're in, he said. Mireille looked at the envelope from across the room. We're in as subcontractor guests, she said carefully, not as principal partners. We're in the room, that's all. That's enough, Emeka said. "That is all I need. One conversation, 5 minutes with the right person, and I can do the rest myself." He was already moving toward the bedroom, already thinking about the suit. "This is it, Mireille. This is the night." She watched him go. She picked up the envelope, read it herself. There was something she had not told Emeka, something she had been quietly not telling him for several weeks now, the way you don't mention a small crack in a wall because mentioning it will require you to deal with it. Her uncle's office had not been easy to reach. The favor had cost more social capital than she had let on, and the invitation, when it finally came, had arrived with a small note from her uncle's assistant that read, "One table, peripheral seating. The chairman's principal guests are his own party. Please do not attempt direct introduction without prior arrangement." Mireille folded the note and put it in her bag. Emeka did not need to know that part. She told herself this was fine, that once they were in the room, once Emeka could demonstrate his business acumen in person, the peripheral seating would become irrelevant. She told herself she believed this. She was not entirely sure she believed this. Across the city, in a life that had no awareness of any of this, Adaeze was having the most ordinary, most quietly joyful Saturday she had experienced in years. She was in Jae-won's kitchen, their kitchen. She was still adjusting to that word, testing it like a new shoe, teaching him the correct way to pound yam, not the blender shortcut, the actual method. He had requested this lesson with a formality that suggested he had put it in his calendar. "Your wrists. Relax your wrists. You're approaching it like a business negotiation." "I know. That is the problem we are currently solving." She adjusted his grip on the pestle. "Feel the weight of it. Let the pestle do the work. You're fighting it." "I'm not fighting it." "Jae-won, you are absolutely fighting it." He stopped, looked at the mortar, looked at her. "Is this a metaphor?" "It is a practical cooking lesson. It feels like a metaphor. Everything feels like a metaphor to you because you are a dramatic person who does it quietly." He resumed pounding, this time with slightly less combat energy. She watched, correcting his rhythm with a patience that came naturally to her, the same patience she brought to teaching junior nurses, to explaining procedures to frightened patients, to all the small acts of transfer that made up the texture of her working life. "Better," she said. "The Adaeze was a greater challenge," he said. "The Adaeze was a disaster. This is merely difficult. There is a difference." He smiled without turning away from the mortar. She leaned against the counter and watched him, and she thought, not for the first time, how strange and specific happiness was, how it was never the grand things, it was always this, a kitchen, a Saturday, a man taking a cooking lesson seriously because he had decided that learning her world was worth his full effort. Her phone buzzed. She glanced at it. "Ngozi. So I heard from BC, who heard from Tunde, who works near the Civic Center, that Emeka and that woman got invited to the Seo Gala next month." Adaeze stared at the screen. "Ngozi, which is funny because your husband is hosting that gala." "Ngozi, I am just leaving this here." "Ngozi, also I need you to know I am available to accompany you if needed. I have a dress, I have energy, I have opinions." Adaeze set the phone face down on the counter. Jae-won glanced at her. "Everything okay?" "Yes," she said, and then, because she had promised herself she would not manage things alone anymore, would not absorb and quietly carry, "Emeka is apparently attending the gala." Jae-won was quiet for a moment. He set the pestle down, turned to face her fully. "How do you feel about that?" She considered the question honestly, the way she had been relearning to do, not the reflexive "I'm fine," the actual answer. "I feel," she started, "I feel like I have done a lot of work to get to where I am, and I feel like his presence in that room is going to require me to be very deliberate about remembering that the work belongs to me, that the room belongs to both of us, that I am not going to make myself small because he is there." Jae-won looked at her for a long moment. "You will not be alone in that room," he said simply. "I know." "And for what it's worth," he said, picking the pestle back up and returning to work with a focused calm she found endlessly steadying. "A man who let you go because of the color of your skin and then spent years chasing connections he couldn't build himself, that man has already lost. He just doesn't know the final score yet." She was quiet. "The yam is ready," she said finally. He looked at the mortar, then at her. "How can you tell?" "It has a specific sound when it's done, and a specific texture." She reached over, pressed 2 fingers into the yam, assessed it with an efficiency of someone who has done this 10,000 times. "Also, you've been pounding for 20 minutes and your arms should be tired." "My arms are fine." "Your face disagrees." He laughed, a real laugh, low and warm and slightly surprised, the way his laughs always were, as though each one caught him off guard. She had come to collect those laughs the way people collect things they don't want to admit they treasure. The gala was 3 weeks away. Adaeze did not think about it every day. She thought about it on the days when Lagos was loud and relentless and she was tired, and she would find herself standing at the window of her office at the hospital, watching the traffic below, feeling something she had no clean name for. Not fear exactly, not dread, something closer to the feeling before a storm, an awareness that the atmosphere was about to change. She was not afraid of Emeka. She was afraid of the version of herself that had existed in his presence, the smaller, quieter Adaeze who had spent 5 years learning to take up less space. She was afraid that walking into a room where he stood might wake that version up, call it back from wherever she had worked so hard to put it. She mentioned this to Jae-won on a Wednesday evening without planning to. They were in the car after a hospital board meeting. She had attended as senior nursing director, he as chairman, and they had both been professional and unrevealing for 3 hours in ways that quietly delighted her. And she was watching the city pass out the window when she said, without turning around, "I spent 5 years making myself smaller for someone who still left." Jae-won did not respond immediately. That was one of the things she had learned to trust about him. He did not fill silences with words just to fill them. "Yes," he said. "And I want to tell you something, and I want you to hear it not as reassurance, not as something I am saying to make you feel better, as a fact." She turned to look at him. "The night you walked into the welcome reception, I was standing across the room talking to the Lagos State Commissioner for Infrastructure. It was an important conversation. I had been waiting 3 weeks to have it." A pause. "I stopped mid-sentence when I saw you walk in. The commissioner had to repeat his question twice." He looked at her steadily. "That is what you look like when you walk into a room, Adaeze. That is what you have always looked like. The only person who ever failed to see it was someone who was too busy looking for his own reflection." She turned back to the window. Her throat was doing something she was refusing to acknowledge. "You stopped a meeting? Mid-sentence? For a woman in a simple black dress? For the woman who got off the bus, yes." She was quiet for the rest of the drive, but she reached across and took his hand, and she did not let go until they arrived. The week before the gala, Emeka went shopping. He spent more on the suit than he had ever on any single item of clothing in his life. He told himself this was an investment. He stood in the fitting room of a Lekki boutique, turning left and right, assessing the silhouette, calculating how it would read in a room of powerful people. He was rehearsing his introduction to Chairman Seo in his head for the 4th time that day. "You look good," Mireille said from the chair beside the fitting room mirror. "I need to look like I belong in that room." "You will." "What do we know about his interests?" Emeka said, turning sideways. "Seo, what does he care about outside business?" Mireille thought about this. "From what I've read, he's private, not much public personal life. Some philanthropy, mostly medical. He funds a couple of hospital programs." "Medical," Emeka repeated. He filed this away. "Good, I can work with that." He straightened his jacket, looked at himself. "This is our moment, Mireille. This is the night." She watched him go. She looked at him in the mirror. "Yes," she said quietly. "I think it probably does." She said it in a tone he did not examine. He was too busy looking at his own reflection. 3 days before the gala, Adaeze bought a dress. She did not agonize over it. She walked into the boutique on her lunch break, moved through the racks with decisive calm, and stopped in front of a deep burgundy gown, structured, elegant, with a neckline that required confidence and a silhouette that required nothing but itself. She held it up. Thought about the Tuesday 3 years ago when she had stood in a different boutique and put something back on the rack because Emeka had once said she looked overwhelming in strong colors. She took the dress to the register without trying it on. She knew it would fit. She knew because it was exactly the color she would have chosen before she forgot who she was. It was a reclamation in fabric form, a small, private, complete act of return. At home that evening, she tried it on and stood in front of the mirror for a long time. Then she called Ngozi. "I found the dress." A pause. Then, "Describe it." "Burgundy, floor length. My shoulders are completely out." The sound that came from the phone was not a word, it was a vibration of pure approval. "Adaeze." "Yes. That man doesn't know what's about to happen to him." "Which man?" "Both of them," Ngozi said, "but for very different reasons." The night of the gala arrived the way significant nights always do, without fanfare, dressed as an ordinary evening. Adaeze was ready at 7. She sat at her dressing table and finished her makeup with the steady hands of a woman who had spent years working in emergencies and had learned that composure was not the absence of feeling, it was the decision to feel things without being governed by them. Her natural hair was crowned and uncompromising, shaped into a high, deliberate silhouette that she had spent Sunday afternoon perfecting with Ngozi, who had strong opinions about the architecture of the final look and communicated them with the authority of someone presenting a business case. "Higher on the left," Ngozi had said, standing behind her with a comb, head tilted. "Ngozi, it is already quite high." "It needs to say something when you walk in." "It is hair, it does not speak." "All good hair speaks. This one needs to say, 'I am here, I have always been here, and I did not come to whisper.'" She adjusted the left side by approximately 4 millimeters, stepped back. "There, now it speaks." Adaeze had looked at herself in the mirror and felt something settle in her chest, something she had not felt in a very long time, the complete, unqualified recognition of her own face. She put on the burgundy dress. She called Jae-won. He arrived in a dark suit, no tie, with the quietly assured appearance of a man who had never needed external validation and had stopped performing for rooms decades ago. He knocked on the door of their home. She still caught herself calling it their home with a small private wonder, and when she opened it, he looked at her for a long, still moment before he said anything. "Jae-won, give me a moment," he said. "We have a schedule." "I'm aware." He did not move. He was looking at her with the open, precise attention he gave to things he considered important. "You look—" He stopped, started again. "There are no accurate words in any of the 4 languages I speak. I want you to know I find this frustrating." She smiled. "Try." He thought about it with genuine seriousness. "You look like yourself," he said finally, "completely, without apology, like every version of yourself you were ever talked out of being, all at once." A pause. "That is the most beautiful thing I have ever seen." She was very still for a moment. "4 languages," she said, "and you chose those words?" They were the true ones. She picked up her clutch. Then they were the right ones. She walked past him to the car, and he followed, and neither of them said anything else about it, because some things are complete exactly as they are, and adding more words would only diminish them. The drive to the venue took 20 minutes. Lagos traffic had decided, in its infinite and arbitrary wisdom, to behave that evening, as if the city itself had consulted the occasion and made an executive decision. The civic center rose ahead of them, lit with a warm deliberateness that turned the waterfront gold. Cars lined the approach, the kind of cars that don't need to announce themselves. Jae-won reached across and took her hand. She looked at him. "Ready?" he asked. She thought about Anubu, the dust, the bus, the 400 naira and the warm Fanta. She thought about the kitchen floor in her apartment after the divorce papers came. She thought about 5 years of making herself smaller in a house that never felt entirely safe. She thought about the first time she laughed in Jae-won's presence, really laughed, and how the surprise of being fully seen had felt at first almost frightening. "Yes," she said. "Actually, yes. Not, 'I'm fine,' yes." He squeezed her hand. "I know the difference," he said. She knew he did. Inside the venue, Emeka Briggs was having what he would later describe to no one, because there was no version of the story he could tell to anyone, as the worst 20 minutes of his adult life. He had arrived early, strategically early, early enough to position himself near the entrance where introductions happened, where the natural flow of arriving guests created organic meeting opportunities. He had his opening line prepared. He had his business cards in his inside breast pocket, accessible in under 3 seconds. He had rehearsed his handshake. He was ready. The room was extraordinary, glass and steel above the Lagos Lagoon, chandeliers that caught and scattered light like they had been commissioned to do nothing else. Tables dressed in white and gold, the low, sophisticated hum of powerful people performing relaxation. Emeka surveyed it with the hunger of someone who had been standing outside this kind of room his entire life, and finally made it through the door. Mireille was beside him, in a silver dress, her expression composed in the careful way of someone managing several things simultaneously. She had been quieter than usual all evening. He had attributed this to nerves, which he considered reasonable, and had not investigated further. They found their table. Peripheral seating, as promised, near the back, partially obscured by a structural column that Emeka chose to interpret as intimate rather than marginal. He ordered a drink, smiled at the couple sitting beside them, someone from a mid-tier construction firm and his wife, who were also clearly at a peripheral table and were coping with this by being very enthusiastic about the table centerpiece. "When does C arrive?" Emeka asked, scanning the room over his drink. "Soon," Mireille said. "And your uncle's people, they're at which table?" "Table 7, we're table 14. "I'll move through the room before the formal program begins. That's the window, cocktail hour, before everyone is seated. That's when introductions happen." Mireille said nothing. "You're quiet," he said. "I'm thinking." "About what?" She looked at him. She had the expression of someone standing at a junction who has not yet decided which road to take. "Emeka, tonight, just don't rush it. Don't push too hard. Let things develop naturally." He smiled, the automatic smile. "I know how to work a room." She looked at her drink. "I know you do." The cocktail hour moved. Emeka circulated with the practiced ease of a man who had been performing confidence for so long it had become indistinguishable from the real thing, in low light, at a distance. He made 3 good conversations, exchanged cards with a logistics director who seemed moderately interested, positioned himself twice near table 7, waiting for an opening with Mireille's uncle's representative, who was engaged in a conversation that showed no signs of concluding. He was on his second drink, recalibrating his approach, when the energy of the room shifted. It was not dramatic, there was no announcement, but there is a particular quality to the shift that happens when a certain kind of person enters a space, a subtle reorientation like iron filings feeling the arrival of a magnet. Heads turned, conversations paused mid-sentence and then resumed, but at a slightly different frequency. Emeka turned, and the floor disappeared beneath him. She came through the entrance the way Ngozi had designed her to, unhurried, complete, taking up exactly the right amount of space. The burgundy dress moved with her like it had been made with this moment in mind. Her hair rose above her with the quiet authority that Ngozi had argued for on Sunday afternoon and that Adaeze had now vindicated. She was looking ahead with the calm of a woman who had already decided, before walking through any door, who she was. Beside him, hand resting at the small of her back with the easy familiarity of a man who belonged exactly where he was standing, was Jae-won Seo. Emeka's drink stopped halfway to his mouth. His brain performed a rapid, unwilling assembly of facts. The woman, Adaeze, his ex-wife, the woman he had delivered divorce papers to through a courier because he could not face the conversation, the woman his mother had called too dark to carry their name, the woman he had replaced within 4 months with what he had calculated was a better investment. And the man beside her, hand at her back, greeting the Lagos state governor with the low-key assurance of someone for whom this was simply a Tuesday, was the chairman, was the table Emeka had spent 3 months engineering a path toward, was the entire reason for the suit and the business cards and the rehearsed handshake, was the peripheral seating at table 14 beside a structural column and a couple who were overly invested in the table centerpiece. Jae-won Seo was Adaeze's wife. The mathematics of this assembled themselves slowly and then all at once, like the way catastrophic realizations always do. Mireille appeared at his elbow. She had seen it too. "Emeka," she said. "That's Adaeze." His voice came out strange, flat. "Yes." "With Seo?" "Yes." "She's there?" "Yes." Mireille's voice was careful, measured, the voice of someone who knew something was possible and chose not to mention it, and now was navigating the aftermath of that choice. "You knew," he looked at her. "Last week you knew." She did not answer. He looked back across the room. Adaeze and Jae-won had moved to greet the evening's principal hosts, moving through the room with the unforced ease of 2 people who were entirely comfortable in each other's presence and entirely comfortable in that space, which was the most damning combination Emeka could imagine. She had not seen him, or if she had not indicated it by a single degree of her posture. That somehow made it worse. He stood at his peripheral table in his expensive suit with his prepared opening line and his accessible business cards, and he watched the woman he had discarded because she photographed poorly, because his mother disapproved, because he had calculated that a better opportunity was available, stand at the center of the most significant room in Lagos as the wife of the man he had come here to impress. He felt something collapse in his chest. Not love. He was honest enough with himself in this moment to know it was not love. It was the specific, nauseating vertigo of a man who has made a catastrophic miscalculation and cannot pretend otherwise. He had looked at Adaeze and seen limitation. He had looked at Mirai and seen access. He had done the math with absolute confidence. He had been wrong about every variable. Across the room, Jae-won leaned slightly toward Adaeze and said something low. She turned her head, and for one moment, one still electric moment, her eyes found Emeka across the distance of the room. She looked at him, not with anger, not with triumph, not with the satisfaction he might have expected from a woman who had every right to it. She looked at him with something far more difficult to absorb, a complete, composed, unbothered recognition, the look of a woman who sees something, processes it, and moves on because she has built a life too full to make space for old grievances. She looked at him the way you look at a scar that no longer hurts. Then she looked away, back to Jae-won, back to the governor, back to the room that was hers to occupy. And Emeka Briggs understood, standing at table 14 beside a structural column, that the most devastating thing his ex-wife had done to him tonight was nothing at all. She had not confronted him, had not arranged this, had not engineered a single moment of his humiliation. She had simply lived her life, faithfully, completely, with her full chest, and her life had become this. He put down his drink. "I'd like to leave," he said quietly. Mirai looked at him. For a moment, something honest moved across her face, something that might have been regret or recognition or the particular exhaustion of a woman who has been performing a story for so long she has forgotten what the truth of it feels like. "We just arrived," she said, but it was not an argument. It was an observation. "I know. I'd like to leave." She picked up her clutch. They walked out through the side exit, past the peripheral table, past the centerpiece couple who did not notice them go, past the column that had obscured their view all evening. The Lagos night received them without ceremony. Neither of them spoke on the drive home. The gala continued without them. It continued the way life continues after the people who don't belong in a chapter finally exit it, smoothly, warmly, as though the room itself exhaled. The program moved into its formal segment. Speeches were made, commitments were announced. The Lagos Lagoon sat outside the glass walls and did its ancient, indifferent, beautiful thing. Adaeze and Jae-won sat at the principal table. She had her back straight and her shoulders open, and she occupied her chair the way Ngozi had always insisted she should occupy every room she ever entered, completely, without apology, without the subtle shrinking that had become habit during years of being made to feel that her full presence was an imposition. She ate the food. She engaged the conversations. She laughed twice at things the governor's wife said, and both times the laugh arrived late, cleared customs, and filled the immediate vicinity, and both times Jae-won turned to look at her with the expression she had come to understand was his version of undone, that brief, unguarded softening that crossed his face when she did something that reminded him again of exactly why he had kept her name on a list for 10 years. At one point, during the second speech, he leaned close to her ear. "He left," he said quietly, 20 minutes ago, side exit." She kept her eyes on the speaker at the podium. "I know," she said. A pause. "You saw him earlier." "Yes." "And?" She considered this for a moment, reached for her water glass, set it down without drinking. "And nothing," she said. "He looked exactly like what he is, a man who bet against himself and called it ambition." She was quiet for a beat. "I don't feel anything about it. That's the surprising part. I thought I would feel something. Relief, maybe, or the satisfaction Ngozi has been promising me for 2 years. But mostly I just feel present. I feel here." Jae-won was quiet beside her. "Here is a good place to be," he said. "It is," she agreed. "It really is." She picked up her water glass and drank. The rest of the evening moved in the warm, unhurried way of nights that know they are doing their job well. There was dancing after the formal program, a live band that understood the particular Lagos art of making a room feel like it has known itself forever. Jae-won did not dance. He had disclosed this early in their relationship with the gravity of someone confessing a significant limitation. "I don't dance," he had said. "At all?" "I have attempted it twice. Both times were witnessed by people who have not forgotten." "What happened?" "I would rather not say." "Jae-won?" "The important thing is that everyone involved recovered." She had laughed for a full minute. He had waited it out with the patience of a man who had decided that her laughter was worth any quantity of personal dignity. So at the gala, when the band began and the floor filled, he sat beside her and watched, and she danced once with the governor's wife, a brief, joyful, spontaneous thing that drew applause from the surrounding tables, and when she returned to her seat, flushed and bright-eyed, he looked at her with open admiration and said, "I'm reconsidering my position on dancing." "You're not going to dance." "No," he agreed, "but I'm reconsidering my position on it philosophically." She shook her head. "You are the strangest man I have ever met. Is that a problem?" "It is the opposite of a problem." They stayed until the program concluded. They said their goodbyes, warm, genuine, unhurried, to the people who mattered, and brief professional goodbyes to the people who required acknowledgement, and they walked out through the main entrance together into the soft Lagos night. The drive home was quiet in the way good quiet is, full rather than empty. The city moved past the windows in its usual extravagance of light and noise and life. Adaeze had her heels off before the car reached the first junction. She was looking out the window with the expression she got after significant evenings, inward, processing, her mind moving through something at its own pace. Jae-won did not interrupt this. He drove. After a while, she said, "Do you know what I kept thinking about tonight?" "Tell me." "The bus." She was still looking out the window. "I kept thinking about the bus, how close it was, how if I had been slightly more tired or slightly more afraid or slightly more convinced that things were not my business, I would have stayed in my seat. I would have gone home, eaten my Fanta, gone to bed, and this entire," she gestured vaguely at everything, at the car and the city and the evening and the decade that had assembled itself into this moment, none of it would exist. Jae-won was quiet for a moment. "I think about the motorcycle," he said, "how if I hadn't been reckless enough to take it out at dusk, if I had been more sensible, more cautious, I would have gone back to the hotel, had a frustrating dinner, returned to Seoul without ever knowing you existed." He paused. "There is a version of my life in which you are simply a gap, a space where something important was always supposed to be and never arrived." Another pause. "I prefer this version." She turned from the window, looked at him. "That was almost romantic." "Almost?" "You referenced yourself being reckless as a prerequisite. It undercuts the sentiment slightly." "I was 29 and frustrated, and it was dusk. People make errors." "People," she said, "do not take motorcycles out in unfamiliar cities at dusk." "That is a fair point." "Thank you." "You're welcome." A beat. "I still prefer this version." She smiled, looked back at the city. "So do I," she said softly. "So do I." They arrived home. The house received them the way homes do when they are genuinely that, not just a building that contains your things, but a place that has absorbed the particular atmosphere of two specific people and arranged itself around them. The lights were low, the city hummed distantly outside. Adaeze dropped her clutch on the console table and reached back to unclip her earrings as she walked towards the kitchen, moving through the space with the ease of a woman who was, for the first time in a long time, entirely at home in her surroundings. She opened her clutch to set her earrings inside, and stopped. She stood very still in the middle of the kitchen. Then she reached into the side pocket of the clutch, the small, narrow pocket she never used, had never thought to clear out when she switched bags, the pocket that had traveled with this clutch through 3 apartments and a marriage and a divorce and a new job and a welcome reception and 10 years of a life being quietly, stubbornly, faithfully lived. She pulled out a bottle cap. An old, dented one, the orange and red of the branding faded to something softer, gentled by time and the darkness of forgotten pockets. She held it in her palm and stared at it with the expression of someone who has just received information that requires complete recalibration. She remembered. The bus, the Fanta she had saved from noon, the walk home after the hospital, the harmattan in her throat, the bottle she had finished on the road because she had been too tired and too relieved to wait any longer. She must have pocketed the cap without thinking, the automatic habit of someone raised to believe you didn't leave your rubbish in the street. She must have transferred it, pocket to pocket, bag to bag, through all the moves and all the years, without ever registering it was there. She had been carrying the night she got off the bus with her this entire time. "Jae-won." He appeared in the kitchen doorway, jacket off, in the unhurried way of a man who had nowhere more important to be. "Yes?" She held up the bottle cap. He looked at it, at her, back at the bottle cap. "Is that—" "From that night," she said. Her voice had something in it she wasn't managing. Wonder, maybe. The specific disbelief of someone confronted with evidence that the universe has a longer memory than expected. I must have pocketed it and never. I've been carrying it for 10 years, Jae-won, in this clutch, through everything. He crossed the kitchen, took the bottle cap from her palm, held it between 2 fingers and examined it with the careful attention he considered things he considered significant, which she had learned was most things. He looked up. I kept a scar, he said. I kept a bottle cap. A pause. He looked at the bottle cap again, then back at her. His expression was doing something complicated that was trying very hard to remain composed and not entirely succeeding. To be fair, he said, with immense and deliberate solemnity, mine is more impressive. She stared at him. I am standing here, she said, having a genuine moment of cosmic revelation about the nature of memory and fate and the invisible threads that connect people across time, as am I. You are making it a competition. I'm a businessman, he said. It's a condition. I've disclosed this. She laughed, the real laugh, the one that lived deep, that arrived late, that had to clear customs and declare itself and wait for approval before it came through. But when it came fully, completely, with her whole body, filling the kitchen and the house and the quiet Lagos night outside the windows with the specific sound of a woman who had found, after a very long search, the precise coordinates of her own joy. He watched her laugh. He had the expression of a man watching something he had wanted to see longer than he had admitted, and now is simply letting himself look. When she recovered, which took a while because once the real laugh arrived it tended to stay, she wiped her eyes and looked at him and shook her head slowly. 10 years, she said. I carried a Fanta bottle cap for 10 years. In your defense, he said, you didn't know you were carrying it. That is almost philosophically interesting. Almost? You're in it, she said. It undercuts the profundity slightly. He smiled, set the bottle cap carefully on the kitchen counter, not carelessly, not dropped, but placed with the same deliberateness with which he placed things he intended to keep. She watched him do it and felt something move through her that was quieter and deeper than the laughter that had preceded it. He looked at the bottle cap on the counter. We should keep this, he said. Yes, she said, we should. They stood in the kitchen of their home, the city outside doing its enormous and indifferent thing, the bottle cap between them on the counter like a small, dented, faded orange monument to the specific Tuesday night that had started all of this. The night a tired woman had stood up on a bus because it was the right thing to do. The night she had used her only scarf as a tourniquet and stayed until the machine of care was turning properly and then walked home without telling anyone. The night that had been waiting patiently and without her knowledge to become this. Later, they sat on the balcony. He had made tea, the specific blend she liked, that he had memorized 6 weeks into knowing her and had never once gotten wrong since. She accepted the cup without looking up. He settled into the chair beside her. The Lagos night spread below them, warm and alive and full of itself, the way Lagos always was, as though the city had made an early decision about its own significance and had never revisited it. She held the tea in both hands. Can I ask you something? She said. Always. She was quiet for a moment, looking at the city. That night on Ogui Road, after I left, what did you think? When you were lying there and I walked away before you could find out who I was, what did you think? He considered this properly. She had learned to wait for his proper consideration. It was always worth waiting for. I thought, he said slowly, that I had just been shown something important about the kind of person who exists in the world. He paused. I had been in Lagos for 3 days at that point. The business meeting had gone badly. My partner had made me feel like an outsider, like someone who didn't understand how things worked here, who would never understand. I had gone out on the motorcycle because I was frustrated and young and not yet wise enough to know that the road doesn't care about your mood. He turned his teacup in his hands. And then there was this woman in the dust beside me, doing exactly what needed to be done in the middle of the night for a stranger because it was the right thing to do. Not performing it, not waiting for acknowledgement, just doing it. He paused. "I thought, this is what integrity looks like when nobody is watching. This is what it looks like when a person is the same in the dark as they are in the light." She was very quiet. "I never forgot that," he said simply. "How could I?" She stared at the city for a long time. "I was just tired," she said finally. "I was tired and I had 400 naira and a warm Fanta and I wanted to go home. I didn't feel brave. I just couldn't stay in my seat." "I know. That's what made it extraordinary." She turned to look at him. He was watching the city too now, his profile calm and familiar against the Lagos skyline. This man who had kept a scar on purpose and a list in a drawer and enrolled in 3 cooking classes and stood closer when rooms made her feel small, who said true things in the plainest language he could find and meant every word of them, who had looked for her name for 10 years and had not crossed it off until he understood what repayment actually meant. She reached over, took his hand. He laced his fingers through hers without looking away from the city. They sat like that, 2 people who had found each other by the most improbable route across dust and decades and damage and the specific stubbornness of a woman who refused, in the end, to stay in her seat. And the city hummed below them, and the night held them both, and the Fanta bottle cap sat on the kitchen counter inside, small and dented and completely faithful, having carried its cargo through 10 years of a life being lived toward this exact moment. If this story found you at exactly the right time, if Adaeze's journey moved something in you today, like this video right now. Share it with one person who needs to hear it, not for the algorithm, for them. Subscribe and turn on notifications because there is more of this story coming. Jae-won Seo still has names on that list, and one of them is in Lagos. The river remembers, and so do we. We'll see you in the next one. Chapter 2. Emeka Briggs drove home in silence that night. Mira sat beside him and looked out her window and said nothing, which was its own kind of answer to questions neither of them had the energy to ask. He did not sleep well. He lay in the dark and stared at the ceiling and replayed with the involuntary precision of a mind that will not allow comfort the image of Adaeze walking through that entrance, the burgundy dress, the hair, the hand at her back, the absolute undisturbed, sovereign composure of a woman who had rebuilt herself from a kitchen floor up and had done it so completely that the finished thing bore no trace of the fracture. He had looked for cracks. He was honest enough to admit this. Some part of him wanted evidence of damage, some confirmation that leaving her had cost something, that the math was at least complicated, that he had not simply and entirely and without nuance been entirely wrong. There were no cracks. There was only a woman in burgundy who had looked at him once, with the complete, unhurried recognition of someone who sees a thing, understands it, and moves on because she has somewhere more important to be. He fell asleep eventually. In the morning, Ngozi sent Adaeze a voice note that was 47 seconds long and consisted almost entirely of a sound that linguists would struggle to classify, something between a victory cry, a spiritual experience, and the specific catharsis of a woman who had been waiting 2 years for the universe to catch up to what she already knew. At the very end of the voice note, in a voice that had come back down to something approaching human frequency, Ngozi said, "Also, the jollof rice at your second wedding was better than the first. I want that on record." Adaeze listened to it twice. She was standing in the kitchen, waiting for the kettle, the morning light coming through the window in the particular way that Lagos morning light came through east-facing windows, warm and direct and without apology, the way the city delivered most things. The Fanta bottle cap was still on the counter where Jae-won had placed it the night before. She picked it up, held it, set it back down. She made 2 cups of tea. She carried them both to the balcony where Jae-won was already sitting, already watching the city wake up, already present in the morning the way he was present in everything, fully, quietly, without requiring the moment to be more than it was. She set his cup beside her, sat down. The city stretched below them, enormous and alive and completely indifferent to the fact that two people on a balcony above it had found each other by the most improbable route and decided, with full knowledge of everything it had cost them both to get here, that this ordinary morning, this tea, this light, this specific and irreplaceable life was exactly enough, more than enough. The river, in Igbo understanding, does not forget where it began. It carries everything it has touched, every stone, every root, every kindness poured into the dark by tired hands, without witness, without expectation of return. Adaeze had been pouring kindness into the world her entire life. The world, it turned out, had been keeping count. The end.